we're still just learning. We're just falling flat on our faces. We clearly haven't perfected in-person education, because there are still people who fall through in-person education programs all the time. And online education is so new comparatively that it's going to be a long time before we've got those best practices totally wrapped up. But I think they're both here to stay, and I'm happy to have a foot in each one because, hey, it's fun. And
you are listening to the Down the Wormhole podcast, exploring the strange and fascinating relationship between science and religion. This week, our hosts are
Ian Benz, Associate Professor of Elementary Science Education at UNC Charlotte, and my favorite teacher, I'm going to cheat and name two, Jean Robideau, who was my second and third grade teacher. I called her St. Jean, and Dr. Glenda Carter, who was one of my professors at NC State for my master's degree.
Kendra Holtmore, PhD student at Boston University. And since Ian cheated, I'm also going to cheat and name two, Travis Frampton and Kelly Piggott, because they taught me how to ask questions.
Zach Jackson, UCC pastor in Reading, Pennsylvania, and my favorite teacher is Ian Binns. But no, seriously.
Zach's really been trying to make me cry in the show for a couple weeks now.
My favorite teacher that has taught me would probably be Robert Newman, my elementary and later middle school and high school, because it was a very small school, history teacher, who was the first person to make history come alive to me. So we have a special guest with us today. I'm really excited about this one. It only took us, 40 episodes to finally get her on the podcast. She is currently the interim pastor of, and I need to get this wording exactly right, First Church of Christ Congregational United Church of Christ in North Conway, New Hampshire. Oh, thank the Lord. There's a lot of words in there. I'm sure it's a wonderful church. Your current interim and your next pastor are people that I both know and love. So I think at least your search committee is doing something right. She is a former Sinai and Synapses fellow who actually was the person that got me connected to Sinai and Synapses due to our common work together in the UCC Science and Technology Network, which I got her connected to, I believe. So our lives have been intertangled. We've done a lot of work together in terms of communicating science and religion throughout the United Church of Christ. And hopefully we will revitalize the UCC Science Technology Network together. She put together a vacation Bible school curriculum that seeks to teach kids about science and religion when their brains are still in that world of wonder and awe, and it's not so hard for them to recognize that there's not really that much of a divide. She is a wonderful person and somebody who has done a lot of online theological education. And so for this episode, she is our resident expert. And in honestly most conversations, she's a resident expert. I'd like to introduce the Reverend Dr. Ruth Shaver.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been avidly listening to the podcast, like, you're my people, and I missed you.
Oh, we miss you too.
Yeah.
Ruth, who's your favorite teacher?
Well, like Ian, I have two. Galinda Salinas from 8th and 9th grade English, who taught me that it was okay to break the rules to be a writer. And then William Pickett, who was my 10th grade world history teacher and my 12th grade government teacher, who basically said to me, nobody's ever made straight A pluses in my class before, and you don't put a challenge like that in front of me. And so at the end of the third semester that I had him, he just kind of looked at me and went, yeah, okay, never challenging a student again. But he brought, like you, Zach, he brought history alive in ways that, even though I was already a history buff, just made it a lot of fun. And he also, very interestingly, was the first person to kind of introduce not necessarily alternative history, but his whole premise was if you can make a C in my class if you tell me what happened. You can make a B in my class if you tell me how it happened. You can make an A in my class if you tell me why it happened and how it might be different if certain things hadn't happened.
That's an interesting rubric.
Right.
Yeah. And
Sounds like a
for an
Doctor Who
honors class,
episode.
it was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does kind of. This is, before Doctor Who had made it across the Atlantic, but
I wonder how you would do in one of Adam's classes. He's that kind of professor who does not like,
because I'd love to know that.
right? I don't think that part made it into the podcast before when we were discussing where he's like, if you do everything that I ask you to and do it well, you get a B.
yeah, he probably would have been a B student in Adam's class.
But he's not with us right now to defend himself.
I know.
He would probably
can
say
trash
something
talk
We
him.
could
grumpy.
totally trash talk him. Because I just want to point out that one of the episodes it was the, I believe, Jurassic Park episode that was released. I had to leave early, and he made a little comment about me, and I was like, why don't I defend that? And I realized I wasn't there. I got to go back and listen.
Yeah, there you go. Well,
It's like, oh, it's on Dr. Adam Pryor.
he may be joining us later in this episode. If you don't hear Adam throughout this episode, that he's not with us, but you may hear him pop up. Anyway, the internet is super weird, isn't it? Where like we can be having this conversation across the country and just kind of pop in and pop out, and people listening don't really know who's popping in and popping out, and we're trying to communicate these things that we've learned over the internet, and sometimes it works, and sometimes, goodness gracious, it does not translate very well. And we spent the last 2 weeks talking about ritual, in particular in religious contexts, and our efforts sometimes well and sometimes awkwardly to translate our rituals into an online format. But one of the things that I am seeing a lot of as well are people struggling to translate education into the digital sphere. A lot of I have a lot of friends and church members who are high school teachers, and they were not prepared for this. I know there's some online components to their work, but I have advised quite a few of them on audiovisual equipment because, through the podcast, I've learned a bit about that. And we have PA charter schools out here that are pretty big, but from the kids I've known that have gone through it, they've found it to be underwhelming. We've had conversations among us about higher education and the value of online degrees. At one point, I think Adam had said when a resume comes across his desk and the person got their degree from an online school, it's like an automatic red mark right then and there that they don't think that it can be as valid as an in-person education. And I struggle with that because of the necessity now. Now it's not just a choice of online versus in person. Now we're all kind of doing it. And so I wanted to bring Ruth on here because you're somebody who has been doing this for how long with Pathways?
I think I facilitated my first course in 2015.
Okay. So maybe you can just kind of tell us a little bit about what that is and how you do it and what its goals are.
Sure. Well, so Pathways Theological Incorporated Pathways Theological Education, speaking of getting names right, is an online platform that is designed to help people who feel a calling to church leadership, either for pastoral ministry like you and I do, Zach, or for lay leadership purposes, like many of the other folks on this podcast do, to develop skills and competencies for that kind of leadership work. And so for preparation for ministry, for example, there's a series of courses that are designed to emulate what we would have learned in seminary. We do it in 6-week courses for the most part, and they're designed to provide experiential learning and interaction with mostly written kinds of things. Although we're starting to develop more of the video technology, we're starting to realize, oh, we're not limited to just written responses and that kind of thing. So one of the things that we're particularly interested in is helping people who can't afford to go to seminary, who can't afford to do common workshops and that kind of thing for lay leadership, especially in those parts of the country like Kansas. Hi, Adam. Who are diversely, not diversely, who are geographically unable to travel because of distance and that kind of thing. So one of the things that we think we have a good specialization in is helping people in smaller churches, because we're also very affordable. So a church that with deep pockets who might be able to send people to a big conference or something could do that. But a church that really can't afford to send somebody on an airplane and pay for a hotel and that kind of thing might be much more doable for $99 for 4 weeks, or $295 for 6 weeks to get some education, and to interact with people across the country who are in similar circumstances, which is always interesting. And we're branching out into webinars now. We have a webinar that will have happened by the time this podcast comes out, but we're ramping up.
What's the webinar on?
The webinar is actually grief and grieving during a time of pandemic. And the Reverend Tracy Blackman, who is the witness and justice and witness minister of the United Church of Christ, is actually facilitating that conversation for us, which is very exciting. And it's several experts. And then if we're assuming that that's going to succeed, because we've already got 35 or 40 people registered in just the first few days of publicity. But then we're going to try to build on that and do some other webinars for other facets of life in a pandemic. And then beyond that, as we're starting to open up again.
Adam's here.
Did you just realize that?
Well, I had to look at something real quick. I come back in, I'm like, there he is.
We were just saying that Adam may or may not pop into this call, and here he is.
And we were roasting you.
Horribly
It feels right and appropriate for so many reasons.
Totally digging their hair, brother. I really wish people
I
could see
refuse to go to the barber. I'm not participating in that. None of this COVID sharing barber shopness. I'm sitting at home every day just packing up my canned goods.
Just getting ready.
Getting ready.
Getting ready for end of days.
There you go.
Oh, man.
I mean, I'm not like the InfoWars people. Like, I'm not going to like cannibalize my neighbors, but I am going to get canned goods. Did you guys see that clip of the InfoWars guy?
Yeah.
You have to you have to look it up. It's, oh my God, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, great. Now you just piqued my curiosity.
No,
There you go.
No, if you're going to go to InfoWars, make sure you do so with an ad blocker so that they don't get any ad revenue.
Oh yeah, true.
Yes.
Going.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
want to encourage them.
That's a good call.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's fair.
exactly.
I had a question about something that Ruth said, but I didn't know, Zach, if you wanted to pause for a second to do an introduction with Adam, or should we just keep going?
We should just keep going.
Okay.
People know who.
You can just add in
I'll
the
mess it up anyway, so.
Donald Duck sounds later.
People know who
or
Adam
something.
Pryor is. Who teaches
That's
at
not helping us.
Who teaches at Bethany College in Lindsborg, Kansas.
Lindsborg.
That's right.
Borg. Right.
Don't mess it up. It's Swedish.
Adam, who was your favorite teacher
Ever?
ever?
It's like some sort of Sophie's Choice question. I can't. No.
Moving
No,
on.
I'm not
Go
not
ahead.
picking a favorite
Kendra?
teacher. No. There are too many who were good.
Do it.
Just say Ian and move on. That's
There you go.
Ruth, I'm interested in when you say that the curriculum focuses on experiential learning too, and just knowing from experience how difficult that can be over virtual spaces. What does that look like in particular? Using more than just the written responses. How does that play out in a in a day of classes?
Well, we're also asynchronous. So we're asking people to do the reading and to be reflecting as they write on how they would actually use the knowledge in a practical setting. So our courses are designed so at the end of the fourth week, there's a reflection paper or a short project that is asking people to imagine how they would apply what they've just learned. And that prepares them then for an actual outcome project, which is the culmination at the 6-week mark. For us, that's a Bible study, it's a children's message, it's a sermon, it's a governance issue with their church. It's something that they can take using their own real world experience to put into practice, so that what they're learning then is directly applicable. Mm-hmm. And we ask people in our opening sessions or in the biographical kind of chats to identify their current circumstance. So what church are they serving? What's their role? And also to identify what they're hoping to get out of the course based on the objectives that are laid out in the course. And so that helps us as facilitators to kind of shepherd people to be thinking in ways of, how might you grow? One of the things that I do as a facilitator is I will actually push people. So I'll read what they've written, and I'll read the responses, and then I might say, okay, so building on this statement, what do you think about this? So it may not be directly related to the actual lesson of the week, but it's something that they've said that I want them to think further about, that may or may not play out in their outcome project, but that often helps to build that base of competency for that kind of thing. And when I write courses, and I've written now 4 courses, and I have another one that I have to rewrite soon, I'm using my own practical experience to help me shape those courses. Like, what have I needed as a pastor that I want my participants to grasp from this course? And the most of the courses I've written have been Bible-based. So what do I want them to know? Well, I don't need them to know the entire corpus of the Hebrew Bible. What I need them to know is the distinctions and the tools that they can use then to reflect on those texts when they're getting ready to teach a Sunday school lesson or to write a sermon or whatever the case may be. So,
that's interesting. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and it's 6 weeks. I can't teach an entire review, an introduction of the Hebrew Bible in 6 weeks, but I can give them the tools that they can then delve more deeply into that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And part of the reason I ask about the experiential part of the learning is because I think one of the concerns that I have about like online learning is the meaningful experiences that I've had in the classroom, especially as an undergraduate student, where there's this exchange of tension and confusion and excitement and anger sometimes in an in-classroom discussion about just like something that's really difficult, and how that looks differently in an environment that is asynchronous. But of course, there's huge benefit to having asynchronous curriculum. But it seems like we're all still trying to figure out how to replicate that experience of the affect of what happens whenever you are encountering someone whose ideas are rubbing up against yours in a way that it just like you learn more than just how to argue. Like, you're learning how to respond and think on your feet, and how to like have discipline and respect. And so it's just interesting to see how people are doing that in this new way.
Do you think that like tendency to try and replicate that experience is like part of the challenge of doing like online education, right? That like it's that sort of like innate tendency, because so many of us particularly who are like educators now, didn't grow up in an age where online education was a thing, right? So the natural tendency is to say, well, these were the good parts of what it was like to be in the classroom. Now, how do I make that happen online? Versus, right, sort of like saying, I can't do that online. So what is it that I'm going to do that's in the online format that's just a better way to do online education? It's like a distinct thing. It's a legitimate question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have like an answer to it. I'm curious.
Well, I think one of the things that we've tried to do at Pathway is to do exactly that, Adam, to say, okay, what's unique about the online learning experience that we can use to help our program excel in its current form? And as we expand to include other technology, how can we bring in more of the kind of in-person dialogue that you might be missing? It's completely different to read somebody's post, take some time to think about a written reply, and have a dialogue online than it is to have that face-to-face conversation. Which isn't to say that we don't sometimes have those kinds of flare-up arguments, which read like, people's posts on Facebook when you get people arguing points and that kind of thing. Especially, I can always tell when people are online at the same time because it's the rapid fire and they're time dated, and I sometimes have to step in and go, time out. But, there is that sense that there is something that cannot be done, and part of what Pathways has done to kind of compensate for that is to develop some courses that are in some sense hybrid. So we have supervised ministry courses where there's an online facilitator working to do some theological reflection, and we work as facilitators with both the participant who's doing an internship and that person's site supervisor. It's not the same as, what CPE would be, or, a pastoral residency or something like that, but it's closer to that. So, trying to bridge that so we're getting some feedback from that in-person interaction with our participants, and, how are they really applying what they've learned in previous courses?
So for the folks who are not really in the education world, when you talk about asynchronous education, you're talking about there being like course content that people digest on their own, whether that's written, or do you have like video lectures that you put up?
Yes. So the way that the courses work is that each week runs, in our case, from Wednesday to Tuesday. So from Wednesday to Tuesday, there'll be course material that people are supposed to consume, whether it's written or audio or video. One of these days, I'm going to put together a down the wormhole certificate and get you guys to facilitate courses for me.
There you go.
Speaking about science and faith. Some facilitators do actually have video lectures that they use. A lot of us will actually pick and choose from things that are available online from other people. Like, I was sorely tempted to use Bart Ehrman at one point in time, but I realized that all of his videos are behind a paywall, and I didn't want my students to have to pay for that. But I did use one of his books.
But you taught a homiletics course this year.
Yes.
Right? And did you have a video component to that?
Well, actually, what we wound up doing because of churches closing down was I had my participants preach to each other on Zoom.
Okay. Well, that's what I mean, because preaching is such a visual experience that it seems like you'd need to have something.
Right. Well, and I'm doing a special occasions preaching course, which I actually wrote. And the outcome project is a sermon that's highly unlikely for anybody to actually be able to preach because it's a very specific thing that incorporates multi-faith kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But I said, if you want to preach it to a room, go for it, because we're all learning to preach to minimally filled or empty rooms. I'm preaching to my dining room right now. And so in some sense, the fact that that this outcome project is one of those that's probably not going to apply in any specific situation is the perfect way for people to preach to a camera.
This is something that a lot of educators and clergy are realizing now in the past, 8 weeks, is that without the energy of a living being or a room filled with living beings, it's really hard to do this work. And like, for example, if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to the first couple of episodes of this podcast, after this is over, go listen to episodes like 1, 2, and 3. And we are very different.
We're very stiff.
Very stiff. Trying to talk alone into a microphone. And we even have video of each other. If we didn't have that, it would be even more weird. But trying to record a sermon alone into a webcam is a whole different beast. And it honestly, really, it comes with time more than anything. But there's also some tricks to it. And in order to create something that people will actually engage with instead of feeling awkward with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that I learned is if I don't wear my contacts and I take my glasses off, I actually am not afraid of the camera.
Oh.
So I look much more natural when I can't see what I'm doing.
So one thing I'm curious about, so we, especially as an educator, right? Someone who teaches teachers and stuff. And given the current situation that we find ourselves in, and that when this first started several weeks ago, there was even thought, amongst my colleagues and some just random people that this probably won't last too long. Maybe this will bowl over by the summer, but we'll be okay. And now there's, we're getting emails and conversations almost on a daily basis of this is now what the fall may look like. You as a professor need to be prepared for those types of things. And that's at higher ed. Then you've got the K-12 setting and what that looks like. You have the church settings and, in religious spaces. And, with my diocese just released guidelines that were put together by a team of people within the diocese and also, I believe, experts in the scientific community. I think that's right. But I mean, it's looking like a good year or more before we are able to be back in the normal space where everyone is there. And so I'm putting all that out there because I think one of the things that you, Ruth, can provide to people that even though I have experience teaching online, it's still different than your experience. And it's different than what I will have to be prepared for in the fall. And so I'm curious, what kinds of things could you, as advice, give to two groups of people, the instructors and also the students, right? Because the students are going to have to learn how to navigate it too. We were even talking on a meeting I was in earlier today about there's this idea out there that if you are participating in an online instruction, that it's just not as good. Like the quality is not going to be very good. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? And what advice would you give people who are having to navigate this as we go?
Well, the first thing I would say to instructors in particular is figure out what mechanism is the best for delivering content evenly across the board. So, is that going to be something like a flipped classroom where people go off and they read the basic stuff ahead of time, and then whatever your online synchronous component is, whether it's conversation or not, everybody's at the same groundwork level. So instead of lecturing and then sending people off to discussion sections, could they watch the lecture or read the material first and then come together and have that conversation? I think that I used that model when I was teaching in person several different times, and it was very rewarding as an instructor to see people engage with that material live in front of me instead of getting it written a month later. Or by video recording, as the case may be. So that's one thing to think about, is how could you flip your classroom? For participants, I think this comes from one of my participants who's been in several of my courses with Pathways. She sets aside a very specific time each week for each course. So she pretends like she's going to class to do that work. And she says, I have 3 sections. So I have my reading and study section. And then I have my posting section where she posts the discussion questions. And then she has her reply time where she's engaging in the dialogue with other participants. And she said that helps tremendously. Now it's gotten a little bit upset with the pandemic because of her work schedule being completely changed and whatnot. But that's helped her, and she's getting ready to finish the program in December after having pushed her way through. So, she said, I'm just pretending like I'm in seminary and I have these courses and I set this aside each time. So I think that the asynchronous part is great because you don't have to be at a specific place at 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning, but you need to have the discipline to do those kinds of things.
Unless, of course, you have Dr. Adam Pryor as your professor. That's
Yes, well.
Because then we say asynchronous. No.
Yeah.
We're going to stare blankly at each other for at least the next hour.
I'm totally sitting in on one of your classes someday. If it's a Zoom class,
Yeah.
I got to be in on
Zoom
it.
bomb it.
I just want to see Adam do a flipped classroom.
I use a flipped classroom.
Yeah.
It's just my flipped classroom involves them reading Kierkegaard out loud with me via the video.
Wait, you really have them read it out loud with you?
Yeah, we really read it out loud to each other.
Oh my goodness, like a book club?
Yes, it was great. I mean, on the one hand, it was not great, but on the other hand, it was really great. It was great. Like, no, so all right. So now I have not gotten my student evaluations yet, so I will not
going to say, have you gotten those yet?
I have not.
Can
But-
we read those out loud together?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can. I will pull you some
Please.
selections from my student evaluations that you can put in here. I've got some real treasures that I've saved from over the years. But this semester I'm particularly curious. But no, right? Like so. But two aspects of that I think actually worked, and I would describe that as a flipped classroom, particularly for the humanities. Right, all of the lecture went into a Prezi. They did that on their own. They showed up, right, and then with undergraduates, what's the thing that they're like asked to do in a humanities classroom? Usually they're said, "Well, go read the chapter and come back, and we'll talk about it." Right. So I said, "Forget it. We're going to read the chapter together. It's a flat ground. The prep work's been put out over here. You do a reflection afterward, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the sort of actual structure of the classroom is taking what would normally happen outside of it and putting it into the classroom. That part's I'm on board with, right? And the students like truly hated it at first. Like hardcore, nearly mutinied kind of hated it. It is.
That's the time I would have wanted to sit in on the class.
Yes, and particularly at first, right? Like, there was this sort of like weird. So at first, I tried like we would just read we'd read a paragraph at a time on our own, and then we'd talk about it, and that was way worse because there's nothing more awful than sitting in silence with the video screen on, and realizing people can watch you read. No, that's horrible. So then we started reading out loud to each other. But that is also like, I forget that that's like a really practiced art that pastors are super comfortable with and 18-year-olds really aren't. And so that took a little while to like get past, like, it's okay for me to ask what this word is when I'm reading out loud, even if I don't know what it is. But all of which I will argue that by the end, it was actually a good experience pedagogically in terms of saying like, okay, now I'm more comfortable doing these things and asking these sorts of questions. So by the end of our like pandemic time, they were like asking like questions that would actually have gone further than I think they normally would have in the classroom because they had gotten so used to sort of doing this. Now, again, this falls in my pedagogy of shame strategy where like you have to have that sort of feeling of humiliation where you read a word out loud that you don't know to get to that point.
Did I ever tell you about the time I said Descartes in class instead of Descartes?
Yeah, you did. And you remember it. And now you'll never make that mistake again.
I'll never
and
say
also,
Descartes again.
You can laugh about it now. And that's why you're such a good learner.
Tragedy plus time equals comedy.
That's what that is education in a nutshell for me.
Hi, this is Rabbi Jeff Middleman, founding director of Sinai and Synapses. Down the Wormhole came out of our Interfaith Fellowship, but Sinai and Synapses also has projects directed towards Judaism and science. We have an open application for our project Scientists in Synagogues, which would give your community $3,600 to do work on Judaism and science. The deadline is July 23rd, and you can see it at sinaiandsynapses.org. Thanks very much.
I just say, though, you said just now how awkward it is to realize that people can watch you read. But if you're in a room with actual living people, they can all see you at all times doing all the things that you do. And none of us ever think that's weird. But I wonder, and I was thinking this last night in our consistory meeting, as awkward as I felt with the dozen people in front of me, and like, are they looking at me? I can't like scratch my face. I can't look around. But I wonder if it's because I can also see me right now, and I can't normally see me. And so my sense of self and my place in the universe is so me focused when it's just me with other humans. But when I'm on a Zoom call, or right now where I can see myself with all of you, I have this weird, like, disassociated out of body experience happening right now. And
so
it's
John,
weird.
I think that's
right
true, but
that.
also like you can't sense people looking at you via online platforms in the same way that you can sense people watching you in person. And
Like,
that
what do you mean?
also is weird.
Like you don't know I'm
yesterday,
staring at you right now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know who you're looking at.
You're right in the middle
You
of my
have to
screen.
signal
You.
who you're looking at.
Ruth
But
is right in the middle.
I was on a call yesterday doing a writing group with several of the students in my department. And it was the first time for many of us to do a writing group where, you like check in, set your goals. And then we sat with our cameras on for 2 hours doing our work, and then checked in for 15 minutes at the end. And I thought at the beginning, this is going to be very strange. And it was, but the reason it's strange is because you know that you are giving people access to watch you, but you don't know when someone like lifts their head and like turns to look at you. If you're at a table, you know that someone is doing that, and then you stop and look and turn to see them. But I don't know, like the 12 people on my screen, they could all be staring at me and I would never know it.
Yeah.
So I think
So
that
Mark-
in combination with your disembodied feeling, Zach, is why it's all so strange.
Mark and I meet, Mark Bloom, my research partner, and I, we meet typically once a week. And he's always been in Dallas area, and I've always been either Louisiana or here. Primarily here is when we really got into that routine. And so, yeah, we will get on something like this, a video thing, for a couple of hours each week and write together and do work and stuff and catch up and those types of things. And so there's many times where we've forgotten, but I mean, we're such good friends, it doesn't matter. But I totally get it, where people have come in his office and they've not known that I was there. And so, as you guys can probably imagine, I very many times have like whispered something. And all of a sudden you'll see, like if I could see the person, you'll see them look around. And I'll totally mess with everybody. And then all of a sudden you'll hear him go, Ian. He'll say, sorry, Ian, my research partner, Ian's there, and then he'll mute me and I can't do it anymore. But it's so much fun.
So
Yeah.
I feel like it's important to like emphasize that Kendra has just described the panopticon, right? Like, so Jeremy Bentham, right, this 18th century social theorist, right, who comes up with a prison whereby it can only be where it can be supervised by one guard because you put this tower in the middle, right? And so the guard can look at any prisoner at any point, but they don't know when the guard is looking at them, right?
That makes this so much darker, Adam. Why
You're
would you do that?
Of course Adam's going to do that.
I mean, it's
That's
not
Adam's
unexpected
specialty.
for Adam, but I just hadn't been thinking about it this way, and
Right.
now,
So
I cannot
your
unsee
writing
this.
group is now a prison, right? So that's really the sort of structure
You
that
ruin
we set up.
everything.
I do. But I think it does explain like why this is like so discomforting, right? Like the fact that you can draw that analogy that quickly, right, is part of what's sort of at odds here, right? And like Zach's description of like being able to watch yourself, right, and the sort of oddity of that, right? That's Jean-Paul Sartre's description of the Peeping Tom, right? The Peeping Tom feels like they're in their own world where no one can see them, but they see this other person. And suddenly when they're discovered, there's a vulnerability that's put there. Except now when we can all see our own faces, we're vulnerable to ourselves all of the time in ways that no one is comfortable with. And we never want to share with other people. That's why we only look at ourselves in the mirror in the bathroom where no one will find us.
Right. Well, and and as far as the online piece of that, especially when you're doing synchronous education, that discomfort level plays a part in how well people actually receive what it is that the instructor is trying to communicate. And so, if you're totally freaked out at your own appearance online, you're not paying attention to what's being given in terms of conversation or in terms of information, as well as you might be if you were sitting in a classroom and, just looking at the instructor or looking at the presentation and that kind of thing. And it's funny, I've developed the habit of looking at the person who's speaking. So like I've got Zach and Kendra and Ian and now Adam, but I'm still aware of my own movement. And I can distract myself just by moving my head or moving my hand.
Right.
And I find myself losing my train of thought a lot more easily on video meetings because I distract myself.
So this semester especially, both of my classes were online anyway, but one of them had a hybrid component to it. And it was the same class, just two separate sections. And then when we went into, with the pandemic, I had to switch the last two face-to-face meetings to meetings like this. And I found that when meeting with them, and also with the other section too, I always offer this up for the other section as well, that I really want them to turn their cameras on. And I tell them that because to me, it was very weird that I had my camera on. And it's not like I was getting dressed up like I was going to work. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and they would be like, "What? I don't know." I'm like, "Guys, we're all in this together. Just turn the camera on." And I wouldn't make it a big deal, but there were definitely some who were adamantly opposed to having their camera on because they just felt like I just can't be seen right now. And I thought that was very interesting. It added a different dynamic, especially when I would see 15 to 20 little black boxes and then me and my bobbing head and all that kind of stuff and my quirky movements. And it was weird.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, those online pieces, when you're doing them synchronously, people's experience of the course, like in Zoom, where you have the gallery view or you have speaker view, I try to encourage people in meetings and whatnot to put it on gallery view so that we're seeing each other at the same time instead of it flipping back and forth. Partly because it's less distracting that way. I mean, the little box lights up, but also because it's as close to being in the room and watching body language and seeing people's faces and expressions and stuff, which mitigates a little bit of that weirdness of being online. And that piece of online education that's asynchronous is a real detriment in many ways because I can't see my students' responses when they're trying to answer a question because they're doing it in writing from the privacy of their own home. Whereas if I were, doing something like Adam did with a reading and then a discussion, I'd be able to see people's discomfort or their quizzical looks or whatever, or their, I really don't get this and somebody needs to help me kind of expressions. Every once in a while, I'll get a panicked phone call. Dr. Shaver, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, I could have written that sentence a little better. And the other piece of the online asynchronous education is that when you're communicating in writing, it's never quite as complete as an in-person communication can be because we lack that body language. Video attenuates that a little bit, but even then you still have the camera as kind of that barrier a little bit. So, there's no such thing as perfect education in any format. But I think when you're talking about moving things that have always been in person to online, the key is to find the strengths of online that can help mitigate what you're losing in the in-person stuff.
That's a good transition into my question to all of you. All of you are educators. That's neat. I am the only clergy person here. That doesn't usually happen. You're both.
No. Your title is pastor and teacher in the United Church of Christ, Zach.
All right.
Oh.
All right.
She got you there.
I don't count you, Zach. You can just be a pastor.
Anyway, there has been such a push in recent years towards the online-ification of education.
Going to use that word, by the way, just letting you know. Online-ification.
Online-ification.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's one of those made-up words like Fatberg.
Trademark
from a
it
couple
right
weeks
there.
ago. And there's been such pushback from entrenched educators who have always done it this way and sees technology as a necessary or potentially psychologically damaging even, and obviously that the quality of education might not be up to par as it is in person, but there's been this push because it's in terms of cost and accessibility and all of this, but now we're kind of all forced into it, and we're having to figure this out as we go, and this pandemic won't last forever. God willing.
No, it's just going to become endemic instead of pandemic.
Well, Kat Robeson, by the way, wrote on our on the introductory thread on the Down the Wormhole Conversations Facebook group, which you should all join. She wrote the phrase "Corona willing," and I love it now.
This is why you got to join Facebook, buddy.
Yeah.
That's what look, Rachel tells me when there's a good one. I mean, she missed that one, so I'll like continue to tell
Has
her she's
Rachel
not
joined the
curating
group?
enough. I can't remember if she did or not. She said she was thinking about joining it just to tell you all of the stupid things that I do, and I wouldn't know she was doing it.
This is Rachel Pryor, by the way.
Yeah,
We're
oh yeah,
talking
right.
about.
Yeah, not Rachel
Yeah.
We
Jackson.
really want Rachel Pryor to do it. I'll send her a private message.
Yeah.
When we do end this and we go back to whatever the new normal is, will we just have done this for so long that parts of the online-ification of education is now permanent?
Yes, I believe so. And it's interesting. So as a science educator, right, and that is a broad category, but my specialty when it comes to the teaching part is primarily science methods, so how to teach science. And there is for a long time there's been a lot of conversation within the science education community about, can you effectively teach a science methods course online? And there's, definitely, I mean, it's not like there's battles, but there's definitely pushback against that idea. And there are some who have done it and have done it very well. I've never really done it. I've had, parts of my, I'll have a class meeting or a couple of class meetings that will be online modules. But to be prepared to do it for potentially a semester, at least, where I need to be prepared for that, is definitely a challenge. And I think it will become part of my toolkit for teaching throughout the rest of my career for that kind of course, because I will learn of different ways to be able to get, to teach these people how to teach students, and different resources and different strategies that they can then use in their own classrooms to potentially enhance what it is they couldn't do. So I think it will be here to stay.
I've really mixed feelings about that question.
I'm shocked.
Are you about to deny the premise of it and restate
No.
it for your
I'm
own?
not going to deny. No, I think it's a great question. I just don't like any of
So
the
you
answers
like
that
the
I'm coming up
question.
with.
Okay.
So yeah, the fact that I like it is part of the mixed feeling. So I think I agree with Ian, right? Like I feel like that you will see people who now have new tools in the toolbox for how they teach, right? And that part won't go away. And I think it's going to kill some traditional features of education that we think of, particularly in higher ed. I don't know about everywhere else, right? But like, it's really hard for me to see where the in-person lecture returns as a modality that people can use, because I don't think it's going to be cost effective.
Really? Cost effective?
I could see it being used still for very large classes.
Why is it not
But that's about it.
cost-effective?
Large universities.
Because I
You
think
don't, oh wait,
yes, Kendra's going to disagree.
This is gonna be good.
Yay!
I want you to finish first so that I
go
can
ahead.
wholeheartedly disagree with everything
good.
that you say instead of just part of it.
Well, we'll send you back to your prison. So no, like I think when I think about the cost-effective piece, right? Like I can pack 500 kids in a room. Great, I can do the lecture. But once I have those lectures recorded and I start offering things in a high flex model, right? Not only can I have those 500 kids in the room, but I can also have the 1,000 kids outside of it who couldn't come to my campus. So the traditional in-person lecture suddenly shifts to becoming this sort of new thing, I think, supported by a denizen of TAs who are, populating out the message that has been put there. I think something like that stays, right? And the traditional, like, I'm going to have lecture with my 40 students starts to die as a result, right? Because it becomes almost too necessary and too easy to pull that lecture from somebody else, pop it in, tell the student they have to watch it, and now I need to do something else with those students in the classroom. And on a sheer numbers basis, that starts to shift the way that things are the way in which we teach. Not because I think that's the best way to do it, but because I think the capitalistic argument about education is going to be that this is the most cost-effective way to do it. Mm-hmm. I think the one place where that gets resisted is in the humanities or social science seminar. The sort of space where you cannot, and I think what the pandemic has shown is it is almost impossible to replicate the structure of putting 10 people in a room Socratically. Mm-hmm. There still will be a place for that, but I think it's going to be it's going to be expensive. And I think that difference is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Now, should I go get some popcorn before you respond, Kendra?
Well, actually, Adam really came back around at the end, and I think,
Kendra likes to agree.
At first I thought Adam was trying to, which would have been uncharacteristic of Adam, but it sounded like you were about to support the capitalist argument and reduction of the classroom as something that should be like, yeah. But no, I do still disagree that, I mean, okay, I just have a lot of feelings. Let me sort them out for a second.
Okay, just go. Just speak.
It's not even that dramatic. I think that I just don't think that the 40-person classroom lecture style will die out as quickly as maybe Adam does. So it's not even a dramatic disagreement. I just think that even if that is inconvenient, there's still all the other connecting pieces of what it means to be a university student. Like, it's not just about going to a lecture style class, which sure is like boring and you sit there and it could be done online. But there's also the way that you walk down the hallway and see the flyers to all the clubs on campus, and you talk to your teacher after class and you make friends, and like all these things that are exciting and important for 18-year-olds who've just moved out of their parents' houses to go live on this campus. And it's a rite of passage in a way that I don't think will be easily overthrown via online forms of education. And I think that is, I mean, sure, it is expensive, but there's something that is really hard to quantify about that like it's not going to go down without a fight, I guess. Yeah. And that's already an argument, I think, especially with humanities faculty trying to like argue the value of something that is hard to quantify whenever we're teaching classes that are, not STEM field classes, that it's already something that is like a hyper concern for us. Mm-hmm. But like, I agree with the toolkit analogy of the things that we're learning now will be useful forever. But I think if it's true, and I don't really know whether or not it's true, but if it's true that online education cannot replicate the in-person experience of a classroom, not in the sense of like, oh, I'm sitting in a lecture, but the experience of debate and thinking through arguments and learning and teaching, like carrying someone's affect and responding in this really embodied way. If online education cannot replicate that, then I don't think there's any way, I don't feel hopeful that there's any way that online education could ever become a permanent replacement.
Right. Well, and I think part of me says that the dramatic change is going to be in those first 2 years of college experience, where they're really the foundational years where you have a lot of those big in-person lectures and that kind of thing. I mean, okay, I'm going to speak about way longer ago at Boston University than you were even born, Kendra, I think. I would sit in a lecture hall with 500 people for an archaeology lecture and then have 10 people in the study group. And I got more out of the study group than I did out of the lecture for that particular thing because it was more hands-on, because it was more interactive. So I'm wondering, if those first 2 years of the basic information will be dramatically changed by the online capacity, with maybe just then those, study sections and that kind of thing. And if it's the third and fourth years of college where you begin to get into those seminars and those deeper discussions where the cost effectiveness comes into play, and maybe if the shift, and it's going to be a generation or more before the shift happens, where what we now think of as community colleges become very much the norm with that online piece. And then universities are those third and fourth year and graduate studies where, especially where a lot of what's projected in terms of the necessary jobs and that kind of thing are more skill-based in the future. And so you want people to be well-rounded enough to be STEAM instead of just STEM, but they don't necessarily need the 4-year college degree that we think of right now. And did I make any sense at all?
No, it does. That makes sense. I am pretty pro Kendra on the residential college piece. Like I'm probably not. I'm not quite like with the crowd that's like, it's going to die as a result of this. I'm like, no, it's going to be around. I think there are social and developmental reasons why it'll stay around when it sort of gets down to it. Right. I mean, like, I think you could ask most college graduate, we could probably ask ourselves, right? Like if you think about the things that you most remember from college, right? Maybe there's one or two things from the classroom, but there are a whole lot of things not in the classroom that were probably a lot more important about that college experience, right? Those aren't things that are going on.
And we may not remember all of them.
And may not want to admit all of them either.
Yeah, well,
maybe that'll be our question to start next week. But which experience don't you remember? Kind of meta.
Which college experience could have gotten you expelled had you been found out? Well,
okay, I'm happy to say I never had one of those, but sadly, I also remember all of my college experiences because, I just didn't get into the whole party atmosphere, but I could have, especially after my father announced to me that the third floor of Mugar Library was one of the top pickup spots in the country. Oh, he said this to me when I was a senior in high school after he had already let me send my acceptance letter to Boston University.
The third
That's my dad
floor
in a
of
nutshell.
Mugar? That place is sad. How is that a pickup spot?
Well, okay.
The times
Once again,
Kendra,
the difference. Once again, the age difference is at play here. But yeah, and I think, I do think that developmentally that's very true. But I also think that that our American society, Western society in general, and maybe world society is changing in the fact that we now recognize that we don't get to be adults as young as we've always implied that we do by our education system. And so I wonder if, as we begin to recognize and begin to accommodate the fact that, we don't truly mature until our early to mid 20s, if some of that is going to play out in how soon people fledge. And especially, the helicopter parent generation hasn't helped that. But, to have that it may just be part of a societal shift anyway, and that what we're learning out of the pandemic, moves us along that way a little further. I'm just speculating, I could be talking totally out of nothing, but I do that a lot. So
would the online component make higher education more affordable, or not really? Because this is such an important ritual for coming of age for so many people. But in the past couple of decades, it's become a lot more cost prohibitive as a ritual. If this could help, then that would be wonderful. But Adam is shaking his head. It's not going to do anything for cost. No? Okay, great. So does anyone have any final thoughts on the matter?
Well, speaking as somebody who's done both online and in-person teaching, I think they're both here to stay. And I think that finding best practices that work across the platforms is going to be really essential to improve education across the board. And that's from pre-K all the way through. There are things you can do online that you can't easily do in person, such as have a group from all over the world, which could be a very beneficial educational experience. There are things that you cannot do online, such as, sit there together and each of you at your own science station figuring out, okay, did I do all of this right? And is my experiment going to come out the same way as everybody else's? That kind of thing. So, there's a both and to it. And I think human ingenuity is going to figure out the best ways to employ the best of each world. And we're still just learning. We're just falling flat on our faces. We clearly haven't perfected in-person education, because there are still people who fall through in-person education programs all the time. And online education is so new comparatively that it's going to be a long time before we've got those best practices totally wrapped up. But I think they're both here to stay. And I'm happy to have a foot in each one because, hey, it's fun. And, there's a universe in which I'm a teacher of nearly any subject you want to go. There's probably multiple universes where in each one I teach a different subject. And I actually know more in each of those universes about everything than I know anything now.
Whoa. Well, thank you for being in this universe with us.
Thank you for being
for this hour. I hope that we can have you on again, and it won't take another 40 episodes to get there.
Amen to that.
This has been episode 40 of the Down the Wormhole podcast. Woohoo! There is something about multiples of 10 that just make me feel a little extra celebratory. And we couldn't do it without our supporters on Patreon, whose generous donations have helped us to finally upgrade how we record this podcast and dramatically simplify my life. Y'all are the best. Make sure you check out downthewormhole.com for show notes and contact information. And if you haven't already joined, please make sure to join the Down the Wormhole Conversations Facebook group. It's such a great little community, and I'm happy to be a part of it. Next week, we are taking you on a tour to that kind of weird corner of YouTube where people whisper to you while pretending to cut your hair and crinkle paper around a 3D microphone for an hour. Oh yeah, it's time for some ASMR. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just look it up on YouTube and look forward to our next episode. Till next week, stay safe, friends, be kind to one another, and in case society collapses...
I'm sitting at home every day just packing up my canned goods. It's good. Getting ready.